Okay, guys, just a quick video to help you go over rounding again, because a lot of us are still making mistakes when it comes to rounding. So let's go back over what we do for rounding. First, we're going to write our number. Say we have a number 68. We already know that the 8 is in the ones place and the 6 is in the tens place. Remember in the question that you always have to look at what they're asking you to identify the place value of. Sometimes they're going to say round to the nearest ones, round to the nearest tens, or round to the nearest hundreds. So you always have to pay attention. So say we had a question where they said here, round to the nearest tens. Okay? So now we know that we're rounding to the nearest tens. When you have a question like this, the first thing I want you to do, guys, is to underline the place value that they're asking you to round to. So I'm going to underline the tens place. That lets me know the place value that's going to be rounded. So once I underline the tens place, then I'm going to go to my number and identify and underline the number that's in the tens place. So what number is in the tens place? Correct, the 6. So I'm going to underline the 6. Now this is the number that's either going to stay the same or we're going to add 1 to it. Once I do that, I'm going to circle his neighbor. The neighbor is the number that's beside it, that's behind it. That is his neighbor. And we use our rounding rules now. If the number is 4 or less, we let it stay cool. That means we do nothing to it. Now the number that we're talking about doing something to is the underlying number. This number here just tells us what we're going to do. This is the number that's going to change or not change. Since we have an 8, we know that any number that's 5 or more tells us to add 1 to the underlying number. So I'm going to add 1 to this 6. And when I add 1 to the 6 immediately becomes a 7. And when it becomes a 7, we're done with the underlying number. Now, everything that's behind the number that was underlined changes to a 0. So now that 8 becomes a 0. And you have successfully rounded 68 to the nearest tens place. All right, let's try a different problem. If we look here, our number is 345. We read the question first. It says round to the nearest hundreds. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to underline what it's asking me to round to. Which place value is that? I'm going to underline it. It's the hundreds. Now I'm going to identify the hundreds place in my number. I know that the 5 is in the ones, the 4 is in the tens, and the 3 is in the hundreds place. So I'm going to underline my 3 because that's the place value that we are rounding to, and I'm going to circle the neighbor. Who is the neighbor, everyone? Correct. The 4. Now I'm going to use my rounding rules. Remember, if the number that is circled is 4 or less, we let the number that's underlined stay cool. So our number is a 4, so the 3 is not going to change. So the 3 will stay the same. So all we do now is we just write our 3. We write our 3. And then every number behind the 3 changes to a what? 0, correct. And you're done. And you're done. It's that simple. And you're done. All right. Say we have a larger number. The number that we have is 4,678. We would simply do the same exact thing that we have consistently been doing. We're going to first read our question. The question says, round to the nearest 1,000. So we're going to underline what it says in the question, which is 1,000. Then we're going to identify the 1,000 place in our number. We know the 8 is in the what? Ones. The 7 is in the tens. The 6 is in the hundreds. Then we have our comma. And the 4 is in the 1,000th place. So the 4 is the number that we're going to be rounding. So what we need to do now is, again, circle our what? Good, our neighbor. Who is the neighbor? Good, the 6. So we're going to circle the 6. Now we're going to use our rounding rules. Remember our rounding rules? If the number's 4 or less, we just let it stay cool. But if the number's 5 or more, this is what we do. So we know the number is 5 or more because it's a 6. So we're going to plus 1 to the underlying number. And when we plus 1 to the underlying number, the 4 becomes a what? Good, a 5. And then everything else behind the 4 changes to a what? 0. And you're done. And you're done. That's simple. That is how we do it. Again, you look at the place value that they were asking you for, which was the thousands. We identified the 1,000. We circled his neighbor. We used our rounding rules. 5 or more. This is what we do. We add 1 to the score. We add 1 over there to the 4. The 4 became a 5. Everything else became zeros. Okay, let's take a look at two problems that you'll encounter that just require one extra step, which is the last step that we had in the rounding rule. Is just simply the numbers that in front, we just bring them down. So say we're here rounding. We're going to round to the nearest what place? We identify the place value first, which is the tens place. Our number is 364. We identify a number. We know the 4 is in the ones, the 6 is in the tens, the 3 is in the hundreds. So our number that we're going to round is the 6. Then we circle the neighbor. We know that by our rounding rules, if it's 4 or less, we just let our number stay cool. So the 6 is going to stay cool. We always write the underlined number down first. Whatever you do to it, you're going to write it first. You don't write any other numbers first. So you would not write the neighbor first. You would not write the 3 first. You're going to write the 6 first. The 6 will go right there. We know all the numbers behind it change to a 0, and all the numbers in front simply stay the same. Do we see that? Now, go to the next problem. It says round to the nearest what? Hundreds. So we underline 100. We identify our place values. And we know what number's in the hundreds place. The 6, who is the neighbor. The 7, We use our rounding rules. 5 or more, this is what you do. So we know we have a 7 because it's 5 or more. So we're going to add 1 to the place value that's underlined. So the 6 becomes a 7. Everything behind turns to 0. And everything in front simply stays the same. And you're done. And you're done with those problems. Okay, let's look at a couple tricky ones when we're rounding using the 9. When you're rounding using the 9, it's kind of a little different, but it's still pretty much the same. But this is what we do. First thing we do is what? Identify our place value. Good. So our place value in this question is the tens. It says round to the nearest tens. Then we're going to identify our place value in the problem. And we know what number is in the tens place. Good. The 9. Now what do? Correct. We circle the neighbor. Our rounding rule tells us 6 or more. We add 1 to this guy here. But this time we have to remember 9 plus 1 gives us what? 10. So we only can put 1 digit per place. So the 0 comes here and the 1 is added to the next place value. So now the 7 becomes a what? A 8. Good. And everything behind the underlying number changes to a 0. If we were looking on a number line, this could be simple because if we had 700 and 800, we know that 796 will be closer to what? 700 or 800? You're correct. It will be closer to 800. So number lines are good too to help you with rounding. Always remember, in between hundreds, the middle is always going to be a 50. So that would be 750. That helps you too. So let's look at the next one. It says round to the nearest hundreds. So the first thing we're going to do is identify our place value. Then we're going to label our place values, ones, tens, hundreds. So we know we're going to underline the 9 because it's in the hundreds place. Then we're going to circle his neighbor. 7 tells us to plus 1. And if we plus 1 to the 9 becomes a what? You're correct. It becomes a 10. And now everything behind changes to what? Zeros. We count over 1, 2, 3. Every 3 digits we add a comma. So our answer would be what? 1,000. If you want to look at that on a number line, you could. That's 900 there. 1,000 here. Remember our middle will always be a 50 and the number that's over here. So that's 950. And we know that 973 is either on this side or this side. Correct. It would be on this side. You see that? So those are just a few rounding tips to help you remember. Always remember, number 1, identify the place value in the question. Number 2, identify the place value in the number. Once you've identified the place value in the number, you circle the neighbor. That is the number that is behind it. Then once you do that, you're ready to use your rounding rules. Remember, 4 or less, we let the underlying number stay cool. If the circle number is 5 or more, this is what we do. We add 1 to the underlying number. And then once we add our 1 to the underlying number, all the numbers behind it change to zeros. And if there is a number in front, you just let it stay the same. Just bring it down.